Good evening, everyone. Do a sound check with our Zoom folks here. Dr. Dancy, can you go through each of those folks, make sure they can hear us here and we can hear them? They're not, okay. That's good, I guess.
If we could have a couple of you speak so that we can know that you're speaking.
This is Gus, Cliff.
Yes, we can hear you, Gus. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Neil.
Thank you, Neil. And Nick is also in the meeting.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is the Dairy Cooperative School District Budget Meeting, Monday, November 16th. And I know we do have a couple members via Zoom now. I believe more will be coming on shortly. So we will roll right into it here. Bond options will be first up on deck here. I believe Jane has that information. It is in your packet too that was handed out and also emailed to us earlier today. So those at home should have it in your email box, or if you're here, it should be in the packet.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay, so the first topic on the agenda is going to be the maintenance improvement plan bond options. And last year, it was requested to try to see what the rates would be if we were to go out to bond for a number of projects in the school district, to try to see if we could take care of some, and especially this year at a low interest rate. So I went back to New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank and asked them to give the same scenarios as last year, which would be each of those dollar amounts for different years. So I also included in the plan so as you can see by the chart, if we want to go over that first, as you can see by the chart, we broke it down by the term of the loan. So, and through each term, either 20-year, 15-year, or 10-year, we gave you what the bond amount would be, the principal of the bond, the interest rate. So obviously you can see if you are going to pay it off within 10 years, your interest rate is going to be lower at 1.5%. And this was really going to be first-year principal and first-year interest. So that's why I gave you all of the backup pages in either your packet here in person or you got it in an email. So you could see what the monthly payment, what the yearly payments would be for the term of the loan, because the interest does change year after year. But in the interest of making a summary to show you what it would be in the first year, which would be July 1 of this coming year, if you were to do a $5 million bond, at an interest rate of 2.5%, your principal would be $250,000, interest $62,500. So our yearly payment next year would be $312,500. And again, you can see all the end dates when the bonds would end. Now, the Barca and Gilbert H. Hood renovation bond will be expiring in just a couple years. So while that one expires, you would now have a new one. I also attached, it's not on a slide because it was really too much to have on there, but I did put in the second page of your handout, I provided the timeline. If we were to go out to bond, you would follow the same process that we do for any other warrant article. We haven't done a bond in a really long time, but this is, and we also would use our bond counsel to do all of our prep work and all the information that would be needed for doing a bond. But it would be out on a warrant article. We would follow all the same regular timelines as a regular budget, but this would be the timeline through New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank of when we would have to provide them information. So as you can see, Friday, April 30th, all the applications would be due. So if, that obviously comes after our town vote. So once the vote, if the vote passed, then we would move on and we would follow this schedule in order to prepare and get our funds for the year, okay? And when I did talk to the rep, because somebody had asked me, or maybe it was a question that came up at the last budget meeting, if we were to do a bond, can you use it for multiple things? And yes, you can, but you have to be very specific on what those things are going to be. I can't just take out a bond for $5 million and say it's going to be for general maintenance. So it can be for several things, but it would have to be a little bit more specific. And then any amount of that bond that you took out that you did not spend, then you would return it. So, and then it would come off our total. So I don't know what questions you would have on this bond. I mean, Jeremy and I have gone over our maintenance improvement plan. We know that the next two projects, which are the big ones, are Derry Village roof and South Range roof. And we know that each year we do have maintenance items and things that, you know, we talked about different HVAC units that will need to be replaced. Each year things might need to be done. So I'm not even sure what option people would be looking at, but we know that at 2.5 million, when we did the roofing estimates, that was, I think those were last year or even the year before that. So for something like that, we know that that would be 2 roofs, we would think, and maybe some other projects in there. But so I just wanted to put those up there, give them as options for everybody, and whether it's a discussion for tonight or you just wanted the information and you'll bring forward recommendations or what you'd like to do in the next meeting, we're open to that.
So, as you said, the reason we brought this discussion up was because of the roof replacements on Derry Village and on South Range. You know, I look at the spreadsheet here, both schools were built 54 years ago. What's the average life expectancy of a school? Do we have, is there one?
Life expectancy of?
In other words, is there some point in time where a school is no longer, as it's currently built, is no longer feasible, and we would have to consider another school to be built?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not really sure what that magic year is. Obviously, we're still in Grinnell, and that's, I believe, our oldest besides Hood. So they either get add-ons, renovations, or in the case, you know, when we had Floyd, it just made more sense because it just wasn't feasible to keep renovating, so we would include that in that new building, but.
For Derry Village and South Range, are there any other expenses that might be expensive foreseen beyond what's shown on the 4 or 5 year plan?
Sure, and I'm sure that Jeremy can come. I know he's planning on coming to the next budget meeting, so if he could come back and talk about what those things would be. But we know that we do have units, and he would be able to speak better to this, but we do have, he has it all logged, the age of all of our boilers and all of our equipment. So, of course, within that 5 years or even soon thereafter, there are going to be expenses.
The only reason I'm asking that question is, if you remember, Jim Morgan at the public hearing and at the deliberative session, I believe, just brought up the topic of building another school. So I don't know what the trade-off would be on building another school versus doing a bond to do these roofs. You know, I don't know, but I thought I'd explore that.
And as you can see, all of the, I didn't put it on that page, but all of the pages that I gave you in your packet from the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank gives you an idea of what the tax rate impact is. So for every 100,000 you spend, it's about 3 cents on your tax rate, or an increase on the tax rate. So they're using the old assessed valuation as well, so they wouldn't have the new one, but, so these are just estimates on the former assessed valuation. But it gives you an idea of what your payments would look like.
I,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I share that concern that we've had evolving discussions about the future of the schools and what the district should look like, and I'm a little worried about a 10-year bond that by the time 10 years' time has come, we're really thinking that we may need different buildings to meet our needs. So I just think that's a serious discussion we have to have before committing to a bond if the money would be intended to use for those schools. If it would be intended to use for other schools, like the middle schools, that we don't see any future need to do something to, that would be a totally different discussion. But I do worry that committing them to two schools that, when there have been any discussions of what the future of the district is, schools that may be involved in some sort of reorganization, I think we have to think really clearly about what our long-term plan is.
No, that's fine, because you kind of colored a little bit where I was going to go. I think some considerations in a bond, and I think off of Bruce's comments about Jim Morgan's comments a year ago are in the same category as Dan McKenna's himself, relative to Derry Village School. I think that we should be looking at, by the time we get to the end of this budget session, what is our long-range plan? And, we've been questioned about it. I've been questioned about it this year. Have we tackled that? And I think that the obvious distractions that we've had to deal with the district have really hindered us from being able to delve into that. It was talked about at our goal-setting meeting. If we were to really look at doing a bond, if we really wanted to do that, I think in Erica's, to follow Erica's point, really want to look at those schools we know that we would sustain, that have a real strategic function for us before we made any decision on a bond. And I think if we can't get to that point, that maybe we just postpone that bond conversation till next year, and so that we're not throwing good money after bad. So those are my thoughts. I think they echo Erica's a bit, and also Bruce's point. So
Did the facility study committee that was done by John Moody, did he look at the different schools and their needs and do an evaluation, or was he simply looking at whether to close a school or not?
It looked at a number of options that included closing a school. It included, one committee looked at reorganizing and in a small way building a new school. It considered all those things, but it just gave recommendations, and there was in the end, it was determined that there wasn't something to be done right then. But yes, all of those things did get some consideration. But it also did look at the consideration of every building and how it was doing, how it was
Thank
holding
you.
up.
Bruce, in our report, in Facilities Study Committee 3 reports, we very assessed the district and gave recommendations as to their strengths and weaknesses, and made recommendations about potential future buildings. So in that report, particularly comprehensive analysis of all of the issues in each of the buildings. If you look at Barker, which is fairly new, about ready to be paid off, Gilbert showed had substantial improvements. So it's really when we're looking at the elementaries and dredge up that report again and take a real close look at it. I think that would give us some sort of a path for the discussion on whether we ought to commit to bonding some things as opposed to looking at some of the existing facilities. It's all there.
So if I could just chime in too, I think I agree with a lot of what everybody has said so far. The one thing I just want to kind of reiterate a little bit here is that we got to this point because we've kicked the maintenance can down the road. These interest rates, who knows where they're going to be in another year. 5 years ago, these interest rates probably would have been twice what they are right now, if not more. And in another 2-3 years, again, they could be in the same place, which makes it a lot more expensive to borrow money. That's why, and again, I agree 100%. I don't want to throw good money after bad. But, I would like to see Jeremy and the administration come back with a recommendation based on, you know, what the facilities, committee gave back and saying, you know, look, is this some, you know, do we have a wish list here? Do we want the 2 roofs? Do we want a little more than the 2 roofs? What would we include? What would we not include? And you know, come back with a plan. And obviously, the year option plans, obviously the golden rule with that, you don't want to be bonding some, you know, if you bond something for 20 years, it better last 20 years. Where you're throwing that money away. If you can afford to pay it off in 10 years, so much the better. That obviously gives you a higher payment. And if there's a possibility that we could, you know, take a longer term and if interest rates stay low, you know, for the next several years, maybe after the other bonds that you mentioned drop off, we refinance or something like that. But again, I just, you know, and I'm not saying we absolutely should decide, you know, we should decide it one way or the other. But kicking the can down the road has not served us well at all. And interest rates, you know, I mean, 2.5% on a 20-year note, that's insane.
I think what Neil says is a good
Hey,
point.
this is Gus. Can I
Go ahead, Gus.
I'd like to make a comment. I agree with John on a lot of the things he said. I also agree with Neil, and I definitely agree with Len and Erica. It's something we have to honestly look at, even though we have a lot to look at this year in the budget. But if we can come up with something where Jane and Jeremy can come up with a good plan that says, if we do X, Y, Z, it would cost us this much, we may need a bond for it, and look at the schools that financially don't make sense to put that money into right now, but do a certain portion of it. I think in the long run, we might be better off than putting it off every year. And I guess everybody's comments the same, kicking the can down the road is not gonna solve anything. But this is an opportunity for all of us to look at different options this year and come up with some kind of real strategic plan that helps the budget, not just this year, but the next 4 or 5 years. That's how I feel about it right now.
And if I could just follow in with one other comment too, you know, to what Jim Morgan said a few years ago, or last year, I forget what he said, but you know, it had some, you know, validity to it. But again, if that's, I guess what I would like to see the discussion center around is like, okay, if we want to build a school, then let's talk about building a school. Because outside of Jim Morgan, I haven't heard anybody, well, I think Dan McKenna may have mentioned it before he left, but I haven't heard anybody talking about building a school. So if we want to build a school, let's talk about building a school. Let's talk about when we're going to do it, how we're going to pay for it. And, you know, again, that's something we should probably put on a shorter timeline rather than a longer one, because interest rates make all the difference in the world. And obviously we would never do that in this budget year. But if we're going to say, hey, we're not going to bond this money because we really want to reevaluate looking at building another school and maybe consolidating and whatever, let's have that plan together for next year. I mean, it's a year's time. I think it can be done. We have a facilities plan. I think we have all the data we need to make that happen.
There was one of the subcommittees of the facilities committee was a facilities subcommittee, which is super confusing. But I was on that committee, and one of the things we specifically discussed in that committee was the option of building a new school, and we actually came up with a rough estimate of around $33 million by doing research comparatively and reaching out to architects for the cost of building a new school, somewhat on the order of a Barca, size-wise.
And would that just be replacing an existing school, or would it be combining 2 schools?
So Barca is about 550 or so kids, I believe, right now, but it has a capacity of a little greater, so that would be greater than any of the 3 schools, the other 3 schools we have right now.
Okay.
It could be on the order of replacing 2 schools. That was when we looked into it, but time has passed since then.
So just a question on that, Erica. Would that be on the land of an existing school?
Yes, we built that idea looking at the idea of using the Dairy Village land and using part of Dairy Village and building up or out, because Dairy Village has the most available land.
Okay.
Facilities plan clearly articulates a pathway to building a new school and new existing facilities that would take us quite a ways into the future, given the existing enrollment. So the question is to balance out, do you invest a ton, we addressed this in the report as well, do you need billions of dollars in some schools that you may end up closing in the short term? And that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I think revisiting the report in light of what we're facing today makes
We also do have a somewhat updated look at what that could involve, because we discussed it at our goal-setting meeting in June, and I actually pulled together a presentation about potentially reconfiguring the schools and looked at what other towns had done, what some of the costs were, and what some of the pros and cons were. So we do have a more updated presentation that built off the plan John Moody is referring to.
And when you say reconfiguring, does that mean redistricting, or does it mean something
Well,
else?
as the minute you're going to be taking two schools and putting them into one, you have to redistrict because
okay.
they're different, that you just can't avoid it.
Yeah, I think the idea is, there was a topic we wanted to get into this year at some point, but obviously when we're using every available square foot to spread kids out, it's hard to have that discussion. And the anxiety surrounding the idea of either just replacing one, which would mean knocking down one, or possibly consolidating. So hopefully going forward, that would be a topic for the board once it stabilizes a little bit, and we can have that discussion. Bonding, I think, the idea, I think is probably good for the future, but again, not really knowing where the district is moving as far as available buildings. And even if they were to come together with a wish list for maintenance, even if you remove the 2 roof replacements in the next couple of years, you're averaging around $400,000, $415,000 for the next 5 years, just as a yearly maintenance plan, which is fairly sustainable, which comes in line between the 10 and the 15-year bond payments. I don't know how much more is out there. I think in the past we've chased maintenance because we've somewhat ignored it, or if we had something major, we just cut it. Whereas Jeremy has done this amazing job of putting forward pretty much everything he foresaw for the next 5 or 6 years. But yeah, definitely, I think it's worth having them come back and to say, is there anything else we missed on this particular version? But I don't know if we remove those roofs, if that gets us to a bond amount that would be worthwhile. But I think it's worth talking about, and if it is a big amount that we've come across, then okay, we can continue the discussion for bonding this year, but it seems like next year is probably, if we don't come across any major expenses, then next year is probably more feasible for bonding. Interest rates are historically low now. It doesn't look like the Fed's going to be increasing rates for some time, so we may buy ourselves a year, but I don't think I'd want to go 2-3 years down the road, but a year is certainly more in line with, getting things stabilized and being able to have more discussions about the future and looking at long-term maintenance and everything else.
Okay.
So I guess for the next
So-
meeting, if we can come up with just if there are any other projects, or I know he's done a ton of walkthroughs. The facilities study committee, they did walkthroughs and put together a really, really good document on what's needed, what was done as part of Honeywell, what's been done since then. So there's probably some good data that they can pull together fairly quickly for our next meeting, and just to see if anything isn't on this current maintenance improvement plan that can be added down, and just say, okay, is there enough to do a bond just to lower the maintenance costs of the next couple of years? And you can buy us a little time to talk about bonding.
Sure. I'll have Jeremy work on that for the next board meeting. So, so I think we should be all set with that for right now. And then we're going to, Chris Callen's going to talk about special education and using federal funds to support that.
Okay, so at least for Neil, John, I don't know, Gus, I don't think I have your correct email, but I just sent an email with an attachment. Who else did I send it to?
Chris,
Yes,
the SAU has the right, Chris, discuss, the SAU has the right one. So I'll give it to you just in case. It's all small letters, A, Koza, but it's spelled different. It's COCOZZZ at iCloud.com.
3 Zs?
3 Z's, no A.
Okay.
I see John Moody's laughing.
If he doesn't know mine by now, I'm not sure what's happening, but
I sent it to you, Dr. Moody.
I have it, so, no, I haven't changed my email.
And the reason I printed it out was, spreadsheets, projecting those, it never looks good. So, sorry, it's asking me for a subject, Gus. All right, so what I want to explain to everyone is, one of the things about IDEA Part B funds, it changes here and there, and one of the things that's changed over the last few years is they no longer really do rollover funds the way they used to do them. Now we're in 2 and sometimes for a brief period 3 years of an IDEA Part B federal grant all at once. So, like Jane's always in 3 budgets, it seems, right? So, I will preface in saying that as far as rollover funds, the current commissioner is not a fan of rolling over funds. He's been quite clear that he would rather us not be able to roll over funds, that he wants us to spend all of our money in the given year of that IDEA entitlement. However, it's still something that is available to us. And quite frankly, it's how we're able to survive with some of the activities that we do. But it's also, if we ever get to that point that they say you can't do it, it's really going to be something that's very difficult to manage, because what happens is you set up these activities, you can't secure any of the personnel to complete the activities until these things are approved. Oftentimes it takes quite a bit of time to get it approved, and then you can't fully implement it. So, so one of the things we're constantly doing, we probably do it between 10 and 20 times a year, is rewrite activities in the IDEA Part B. So it's a little bit of a finance dance that we have to do, just keeping up with it, identifying, are we not going to be able to spend those funds? How can we reallocate those funds? Now we have to get approval for that activity and all of that. But what I was trying to do with this is, so in that first column, you see IDEA Part B 2020 and 2021 activities. Those activities in the left, those are just some of the activities that are included in the IDEA Part B funds. Our annual IDEA entitlement is about $1.2 million. So you see there's $1.9 million. That's because, some of those activities we were able to do across a couple of years. But I will say, currently, the behavior consult is in there, the special ed teachers at Derry Village, the special ed teacher at South Range, the NECC partner classroom at South Range, special ed assistants totaling $775,000, OG reading, psych evals, we've already rewritten and taken that back down some, partly because the person, one of the evaluators, isn't available to us at this time. Speech therapy, the targeted instruction, we've already rewritten that to reduce that because we couldn't find enough providers to do that activity. And the PD stipends, we've already rewritten to reduce that. And the specialized instruction materials, nothing in there currently. So really, the point that I hope to make with this is, I understand why, the question comes up, why can't we keep NECC South Range in the IDEA funds? Why can't we keep those teachers in there? We just don't have enough in that IDEA Part B federal entitlement to keep all of those things in there. The more we get into using salaries, in addition to the salary, it's the benefits. You have to cover everything that goes along with whatever that provider or activity costs. So that includes retirement, it includes FICA, it includes the salary, it includes health insurance, dental, all of those things. We're constantly having to look at who do we have in what fund, for example, with the assistants, if we are looking to bill Medicaid. So if we're looking to bill Medicaid for any students with whom a particular assistant works, we have to constantly look and say, well, are they working with students who we might be able to bill Medicaid? We need to move them out of the IDEA. We have to put them in district funds and switch them with somebody else. So we're constantly having to look at that and address that. But long story short, as you can see, the number of, the amount of money that the activities that we have costs, we just can't keep all of those things in there still. That's why we did propose 2 of the special education teachers, and we've, have proposed that we keep at least 1 now in the IDEA. And if we're able to keep the NECC partner at South Range, if we're able to move that into the district funds, I think we could keep the NECC Middle School 2, we're calling it right now. We're not exactly sure which middle school it would be at. It's likely it would be at Gilbert H. Hood. There's just more space at Gilbert H. Hood, and the spaces are a little bit more flexible as far as usage for a program like that, but we haven't finalized that decision. We would look to reduce the special ed assistance total amount in the IDEA in 21-22 and look to carry over some funds to cover any of those positions that we need. However, one of the other catches here is we have a number of vacancies right now. So there again, we're not even able to fill those positions. Why commit funds to those positions that we can't fill and run the risk of losing those funds? I think we would hedge our bets a little bit. We would make adjustments as we go along. And it's been several years. It's not just due to COVID. For a couple of years prior, we have really struggled to secure and fill all of our special education assistant positions. So we think if we hedge our bets a little bit, we'll be able to keep up with it and rewrite the grant as necessary to fill positions as people become available to fill the positions. Psych evaluations we would reduce significantly, about half. Speech therapy we would keep in the IDEA. That's one of the things that we used to have 11 speech and language pathologists. We now have 9. We contract under contracted services and district funds and in the IDEA Part B funds here for additional speech and language pathologists and or speech and language assistants. Some of you might recall we proposed speech and language assistants a few years back, but we weren't successful in securing those. So really, so that far right column, or the third column, it's not that far right, we would continue to request that in the 21-22 budget that we fund 2 special education teachers in the South Range partner classroom, and then the 1-to-1 ABA paras for the middle school 2 are also included already in that total contracted services line item in the 2100 series. But we did also reduce the budget because we've always, I think I explained this at the last or at the meeting prior, we've always included the cost of out-of-district tuition as what we would expect or project that we need in the out-of-district tuition line item in the 1200s. We did that did increase. We've since reduced that by the amount of the proposed NECC partner at South Range, even though it would not necessarily be those students. It's the middle school students. But if we're able to move the South Range program in, keep that in the budget, we believe we could fund the middle school to partner classroom in the budget. As you can see, they're pretty similar, so, 6 of one, half dozen of another there. If we didn't fund both of those NECC programs, we would have to go back and put that money back in out-of-district placements.
How many ABAs are included in that line, middle school to ABA? That's not just one, is it?
4.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Chris,
Yes.
I have a question for you. I know a couple of times you mentioned in a lot of meetings we've been at, is one of the problems you're having a hard time recruiting teachers for specific areas. Is it because of the lack of resources out there, or is it because of the pay scales competitive to other districts? From your experience, you've been around and done this for a while, all the other districts facing the same challenges we do right now, trying to find people to fill these positions?
Yeah, for the paraprofessional positions, the assistant positions, yes, I think that's a universal problem right now.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, could you just clarify, just for folks that may be watching from home, what you're showing here is basically how we're using federal funds. This isn't showing any potential cuts to positions.
Yeah, no, this is not showing any potential
Okay.
cuts to position. This is only showing funding sources.
Okay, that's what thank you.
Yes.
And if I hear you correctly, you reduced some line items by in areas where we haven't been able to haven't been able to find staff for those positions to more accurately reflect where we are.
Yes, thank you
Okay.
both for those questions to clarify that, yes. So the reduction in special ed assistance piece, we currently have several vacancies. So it would really be reducing the IDEA federal entitlement by a number of positions that we've been unable to fill, continue to look to fill those, and then look to roll over funds as the year moves on to continue to fill those positions. Just constantly rewriting the activities, looking at each activity very carefully and saying, we are not spending X amount. For example, with any contracted service, especially, the district-funded one-to-one ABA paras in the NECC program, the ones that we directly contract with that are not NECC employees, they only get paid when they work. So if they're out, the total cost over the year for each of those folks reduces. Although it might be a small portion for each one, it adds up and we're able to reallocate those funds in other ways or carry them forward to continue to fund those same positions and thereby reducing the total amount that we need to fund either out of our contracted services account or out of the IDEA Part B. Any other questions?
I have a question. Are we partnering with any local universities or community colleges in terms of building a relationship where they can send us some of their graduates?
We do a lot of that with student teachers, of course. All of the schools do that. We have reached out to several universities looking to, get their graduates or even some folks that might be able to do some type of internships and things like that. We've reached out to all the local universities. We'll continue to do that. I have reached out to some and just in the beginning stages of looking at, could we even create a co-op program? We talked about that today once again, just looking for substitute teachers. Mary Ann talked about, folks graduating in January or in December so yeah, we're constantly doing that.
Yeah, Dr. Bicknell out of Manchester Community College expressed some interest. He's a friend of mine. He'd be willing to have an early education program. partner with us and kind of get that ball rolling.
Great. If you have any direct contact info for him, just send it to me. That'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely send them our way. We have a great partnership with Southern New Hampshire for our student teachers. They have really been a great salvation to us during the fall. Excellent job and work within our schools. And Kathy Kennedy, our Director of Human Resources, reaches out to all of the local universities and really beyond just our general area for any substitutes or any, graduates that can help us out with where we are. And that's not only this year, but with a particular emphasis on this year. But it has been in existence for a while. So thank you. Anything that you have that can help us, we're always willing to look for resources that can help all of our students.
Yeah, and I think any time we can offer some sort of open house, so I know that the times are a little bit challenging now, but open our doors and let people know that we're hiring and looking for help, and when that time comes around, if we can kind of get involved in some of those, I think it'll really kind of push the great district we are and get some more people in here.
Yeah. And we actually make direct calls to universities through our Human Resources Department. We've made those well since the beginning of the year, asking for help and any type of assistance that we can have to fill in the gaps that we need. So thank you, and again, any connections that you have would greatly appreciate.
Any other questions on the special education presentation? Okay, we can certainly come back to that. We can roll into the budget updates that Jane has put forward with us.
So we wanted to list every financial change that we made from the last budget meeting so that you could see when we get to the final summary page. Sometimes there's little things too that we take out, but we wanted to list the major areas that we changed from the last budget meeting. I think this group all agreed to reduce the projected number of Pinkerton students by 30. And so that's reflective. Again, if when they give us their budget, this will be changed as well, depending on what they have for tuition rate this year. We budgeted a 4% increase as a placeholder. We also put in the 2 ESOL assistants that we talked about at the last budget meeting, reducing those, and I think Sarah talked about that in Austin, about being able to use the existing staff and reducing 2 of the ESOL assistants. And for those who don't know what that is, it's for English speakers of other languages. And we also talked about reducing the maintenance improvement plan by we went up to $514,000, and that was reflected in your budget. And like Chris said, when he was talking about keeping the South Range School NECC program in the general budget, we were able to offset that same amount out of the out-of-district tuition amount. So those were really the only changes for expenditures that were reflected in this budget. For revenues, this gets a little more interesting. So if we want to talk about adequate education, which just came out, the amount that they are projecting that we'll receive for next year is $23,721,185.70. Now, hold on. So from this year to next year, that will be it's a reduction on our budget or our revenue source by $59,339. Now, as we know, it's all based on ADM, or average daily membership, and last year the average daily membership was 4,714 and 0.56. I know those are pupils, so it's hard to be a 0.56, but that's how they do it. And for 2021, because when they calculate adequacy, it's always based on the prior year. So for 2021, based on the numbers we have right now, the average daily membership would be 4,706. Now, that does change by the time you get to the end of the year, number of students, so it's all the average daily membership throughout the year. So right now, that's going to be their projection, and they always change it. Once they get to the end of June 30, there's going to be a change depending on your number of students. But remember, we did not get full tuition for all of our kindergartners last year. So if you think that you're counting those last year that you would have had them, now you've got all your full-day kinders, and those would be included in your amounts. But then you have to remember that the homeschoolers increased this year by 95 students. So if you have an additional 95 students being homeschooled, that's approximately $359,000 loss of adequacy for next year. So I know that some people would think, well, if you've got kindergarten this year, your average daily membership should be a lot higher. But you have to offset that with our actual enrollment right now is a little bit off because of the homeschoolers. So again, that's going to change before we finalize next year, but I just wanted to review that with you. And there were also things, you know, there's a formula, these are all online, I can forward them to everybody if they would like, but there's a formula when they calculated even this current year, because remember, we had fiscal disparity aid of 3.4, 3.3 million. And part of the adequacy for this year also included additional funds for free and reduced students. They use those numbers to give each district more money based on those numbers. So there's a whole formula of how they come up with our total adequacy. But I just wanted to let you know that we made that change in your summary page so that you could see the difference. We also, in our summary page, when I get to that, we looked at anticipating the retained funds. As you know, we've talked about the retained funds at the end of June of 2020, and we went into the year with $530,000 in a retained fund, and then we added funds from the end of June 30th of 2020 to have a total of 1.2 million. So we included that on our summary sheet. So if we were to use those retained funds to reduce taxes, I put that in the summary sheet so that you could see what that would be and how that affects having that as a revenue source to reduce your taxes. Because, you know, last year when we got that, when they told us we were going to get that adequacy aid, the fiscal disparity one time, it's great to get $3.3 million as a one-time. We were able to do paving and a lot of other things. But then you know you're going to spike the next year because you're going into that budget $3.3 million short. So in looking at if we were to use that as a revenue source, I've included that. And I'll also tell you what it would be if we took that out. And we also, when I was just prepping to do tax rate setting and I talked to the state and we review all of the state funding, we talked about our special education aid and we were a little bit high on our projection. So I just wanted the projected one for 21-22 to be more reflective of what we're budgeting right now, since we don't know what it will be. So we did reduce that as a revenue source. So this is the same chart that we give at every, we try to update it at every budget meeting. It really is the summary of object codes, and in our budget, an object code is, it's more of a thing than a department. So it breaks it down by salary, benefits, supplies, utilities, and anywhere that you can see that's highlighted, or it's hard to see it on the screen, but it would be where Bill made changes in the budget. And they're also reflected, all of those changes are also reflected in your handout packet, and I'll go over that after as well. Actually, I'm going to go over it now because I have it right in front of me. So the people who are remote, it was one that was emailed in your packet today. It's the page that looks like this. It really just shows you all of the increases and decreases that we have done since the first time we presented the budget. So every time we make a change to the budget, it's going to be on this sheet. So you can follow along and look to see what we've made for changes that go with the front page of the summary. So that's just something that you can look at, but it will match with these. So our overall expenditures for general fund and federal fund and food service is a projected 2.16% increase over the current fiscal year. So this is a little bit different. Bill put this slide together and wanted to show the budget in a different format so that you could see as it would follow along with everybody got this one too in their budget. This is one that you get every time we do budget. It's basically my baseline budget of every change that we're going to do will always be on here. So we put a change in expenditure summary on there, and it's reflective of what's on this longer document. But just so that you can see again exactly where we've made changes from the beginning of the budget that we proposed. So you'll see that, for example, general education, we've reduced the budget by $11,835. And you go further down, Pinkerton Academy, we reduced it by $412,776. So everything that we've done in the budget is on this page in detail, and it's reflected in here that follows along with the pattern of the budget. And so far, we've made proposed expenditure reductions of $1,253,945 since the first time we presented the budget. And then the next slide. Again, this is another way to show you the finances that Bill put together. It shows the revenue and what changes we've made from the time that we proposed the budget. You can see that Revenue Fund 1, which, in case people don't know, the general fund is all of our funds that support all our general curriculum, tuition for Pinkerton, anything K through 12, K through 8, that is not supported by federal funds or food service. So everything there would be under general fund. And you can see for the revenues, we reduced the revenue projection by $56,000. That was that special ed aid. And then Bill showed you what the net expenditures would be, or change from the expenditures to the revenue, and then the change from the adequacy, and showing if we used that retained fund of $1.2 million, what the change in revenue would be. Okay? So the next slide.
Can I just chime in real quick, Shane, if you don't mind? So I'm a little unclear on the retained fund. So are you proposing, or is the proposal to exhaust the entire fund balance of 1.2 million?
I'm just showing that as a scenario if you were to use that. When we talked about retaining the additional funds at the end of the school year, knowing that it can be used to reduce a tax rate, I'm showing it as an example of if you were to do that, that's how much it would affect your budget for next year. So if we had to use something to reduce our proposed budget, you could do that. We also expect at the end of this year, we will either be able to add to it or still have an unreserved fund balance to go towards offsetting taxes as well, or perhaps replenishing some of that 1.2.
And I guess my concern with that, and this is similar problem we have on the town side as well. I mean, you have a limited pool, and yes, maybe you have some more to add into fund balance next year. But, the fact is, the state, the state keeps downshifting costs onto the schools, onto the towns. And, we have this little tiny piggy bank of fund balance that we try and absorb some of that in, but it's just not sustainable. And I just, I'm preaching to the choir here, I'm sure. But legislatively, we need to come up with a sustainable solution, because the state can't keep just downshifting costs and saying, well, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. But we still have to educate the kids. You just can't square that circle. And I'm just concerned, we were downshifted a bunch of retirement money this year. And what's the criteria that we're going to use for, okay, we're going to use fund balance to offset this downshifted expense, but not this downshifted expense? Again, I'm preaching to the choir here. We have the same issue on the town side with our budgeting process, but it's just not sustainable.
Right, yeah, and Neil, and that's sort of the position that we're put in, and I knew going into this budget year that we would be at such a loss of revenue compared to 2021. It would be great to save that 1.2 million for, if there were an emergency repair, or if we needed to offset or take some of it to do an offset and maybe not use it all. But in the scenario that I passed out, I just wanted to use that and show what the tax impact would be with or without it. But I agree with you on that. So
Does this budget assume no decrease in the stabilization funding?
The only thing that they sent out for us is the actual reduction of the 59,000. That's
Okay, but the stabilization fund's been decreasing by 4% every year for the last 5 years, if you include 2022. So do you anticipate the stabilization fund to not decrease this year, or for this budget?
I haven't heard anything different.
You haven't heard anything different, which means
Do you mean
what?
for 2021 or for 21-22?
2022.
21-22? No, and we actually were, and Marianne and I were both on a call today going over all the adequate education and all the numbers. And right now, I mean, there's a lot to go through for the stabilization grant. So for Derry, for 21-22, the stabilization grant looks like it is $8,658,713, which is part of the 23 million.
Right.
Yep. So it looks like it's still going to be there for 21-22, and what happens after that, I'm not sure, but.
Okay.
So that document was from the state?
Yes.
So they're not showing a 4% reduction in that?
I'd have to go pull the
I
rest
would
of the
say we
document,
might
but it
want to
doesn't.
clarify with them, since recently they've been bad with their information.
Yeah. Yeah, so it just came out, so we'll check on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I wanted to give a tax update, because it's really hard when we're working through a budget process and projecting how much the tax impact is going to be. Now, we know that for every 100,000, it's approximately 3 cents to either add to your tax rate or reduce your tax rate. So the tax rate that we currently have from last fall is $15.36. And when we were working on our budget last year and projecting what our tax rate would be, even up until now when we've been working on the budget process, we were using the assessed valuation from last year and knew that they were going to be going through a valuation, but didn't know what the amount was going to be. So the assessed valuation last week, when we found out, when I was prepping to set the tax rate, that we could not include the projected revenue from kindergarten aid, since it wasn't funded. So we removed it from our revenue projections for 2021. And we had the board meet and make a motion to reduce the retained fund balance by the kindergarten amount, which was a little over 500,000, and add it to our unreserved fund balance so that we could offset the taxes by the amount of that kindergarten aid loss. Now, if we get that kindergarten aid in the spring, that will just go towards our unreserved fund balance at the end of the year. There is no adjustment for taxes even if it comes in. So with that being said, we then found out that the new assessed valuation amount increased, you can see we're in the billions up there, to 3.5. So the estimated tax rate for the school district portion, based on the approved appropriations, would be $14.44. Now, if we had kept the kindergarten amount that we added to the unreserved fund balance, this gets a little tricky, if we had kept it in there, the estimated tax rate would have been $14.31. So we are down, our estimated tax rate is down about $1.05. So, and that's what we're going to talk about at the meeting after this, is moving that $500,000 that we took out of the retained fund balance and putting it, when we moved it to the unreserved fund balance, we want to move it back to the retained fund balance to put the retained fund balance back up to the 1.2 million. So we just transferred 500 from both of those funds last week, and then when we saw the new assessed valuation, we just want to reverse it out to put the retained fund balance back to where the original vote was of the 1.2 million. So there will still be a reduction on the tax rate with even doing that. So the tax rate for the school district portion would be $14.44, and currently it's $15.36. If the valuation hadn't changed and we were still doing our projections like I had been up until last week, the tax rate would have been $15.93. So I just want you to see where I can give all these projections on what tax rates are going to be, but when the assessed valuation changes, it can completely change a tax rate. So that's why we're so far off, if you're wondering why we're down $1.05 on a tax rate projection. And I also wanted to show you, so you can see where the tax rate was all of last year, $15.36. This current tax rate, if we were to reverse out that motion from last week and put the 1.2 million back to being whole, then it would be $14.44. And so when I did the summary page, I also used the same assessed valuation in projecting, which on your proposed budget update 1.2 here, using the same assessed valuation, the 3.5, the projected tax rate would be $15.76, which would be $1.31 over the current tax rate. If we hadn't changed the valuation, that would have been $17.37. If we don't use the retained funds, if we don't use that 1.2 million in retained funds, it would be $17.75. So when I did the projection of the $15.76, I did it using the 1.2 million in retained funds from the 1920, and we also did it basing on a projection of 2.5 million of unreserved fund balance from 1920, which is a decrease of 453,000. So at the end of 1920, we returned $2.9 million in unreserved funds to offset taxes. And we also were able to add to the retained fund balance to make it the 1.2. But in my projections, we're projecting $2.5 million in unreserved funds. So that's why it shows we have a reduction in the revenue of Fund 1 by that amount. Well, it's pretty close to that amount. So to further clarify, these funds are not held in another account or anything like that. They're not a capital reserve fund that is held by the trustees of the trust funds at the town. These are just funds on paper, bookkeeping. So it's transferring from one fund to another, and that's what those are. Each year, we have an unreserved fund balance. We budget for it. Again, last year, we had 2.9. This year, we're using 2.5 as a placeholder, and that is used as a revenue, so we just want you to be aware of how we do that.
So just to be clear, if you don't use the retained funds, you're estimating the tax rate would go up $3.30. But if you do use the retained funds, it would go up $1.31.
Yes.
This also doesn't include the anticipated kinder funds, which we
Right.
absolutely hope we get.
Right. But I can tell you right now, a $3.30 increase, you'll never pass, so.
So, and can I chime in with a question?
Sure.
If Bill is on the if Bill's on the camera, if Bill could come in here for a second? Okay, Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, so, just going back to the kindergarten fund, so, and again, I'm a little perturbed at this because I questioned this quite extensively at the last meeting, and you folks told me that you had spoken with numerous experts that said, no, the money's gonna be there, we can use the money, and then you find out from the state, you can't use the money, and it seems, the money's not there, of course you can't use the money. It seems pretty basic, and I can't believe that nobody talked to, be it DOE or DRA, who were these experts that you were talking to that said we could use this money?
So Neil, it was those wonderful experts that just told us we can't use it, that told us we could use it back in September. So the idea was the law was written that a promised to towns to get us to go to full day K, that they would give us money. They goofed and didn't put money into the accounts to do that. And then they said that they would do it at some point. So rather than see a 15-cent spike in the taxes, we went with the legislators that said that they could get it done. But then after
Legislators
that,
that were all running for re-election and telling you what you wanted to hear, right?
either way, I think it's a bipartisan effort. There are towns both sides of the aisle that are affected by this. I don't think any of them are going to turn their backs on it, but either way, the logic behind it was to prevent a 15-cent increase in the tax rate. So the idea was, let's listen to them. We had the 1.2 in retained funds to use if it didn't come through. But then when the state said, now we're not going to allow you to use it, even though a month ago we said that you had it, that kind of threw us for a loop. So it's hard when one agency tells you two different things, 2 months apart when you're just about ready for tax setting. It just goes, one more thing of 2020. You try to do the best you can, but sometimes there's no one there to help you out. So we're helped out this year quite a bit by that assessed valuation. So again, to your point, what the board hopes to do is to put the money that we were going to use to offset that 15-cent increase that we couldn't use before back in the long-term fund and still give the town a $1.08 decrease in taxes. So
the state at one point said we could use this money? Who did we get that communication from?
It was not through DRA. I had conversations with the Department of Ed. And just as a note, that $17.75, it wouldn't be a $3 increase. The $17.75 would be if you were still using that evaluation had not changed. It would be a 34-cent increase. So it would be $1.65 of an increase. If you took that 1.2 million out as a revenue source, it'd be another 34 cents.
Jane?
Yep. Yes, Dr. Moody?
All of this is predicated on the proposed budget. We still have two large outstanding collective bargaining agreements to settle. So we need to
Correct.
think the impact that that's going to have on the proposed budget, but it's hopefully settled by the time of deliberative session. So it looks better today, but it may not look so great if we look at what, around a 3% increase over time on those collective bargaining agreements on the total budget. Is that right?
That's correct. They would all be separate warrant articles. And this does not include either of those negotiated agreements.
When is that gonna be included, Jane?
I think that they've ratified it. They have ratified
It
it,
was just
so,
ratified, so it should be the next.
so it'd be the next
Next meeting?
budget, the next board meeting or budget meeting. They just have to vote on it, but I know they've completed the negotiations so that we can actually bring the dollar amount to the next budget meeting.
We're also waiting for Pinkerton's. This is an estimate we have in here for Pinkerton based on last year, so we're also waiting for Pinkerton. We did ask them this year, well, some of our sending town colleagues asked them to get the number to us a month earlier. We asked them to get it to us 1 or 2 weeks earlier, and we're now past that timeline, so we're still waiting on Pinkerton.
Hey, Jane, Gus,
Hi, Gus.
I have a quick question for you. I've been listening to Neil, and we've talked about this in the last couple of meetings. Somehow, I don't know how, but we have to be real careful of money that we don't have right now, because our budget's already tight as it is. One of the things I suggested, we're talking about a bond, we're talking about this, we're talking about that. I think we have to take a step back a little now and say, okay, what money are we actually gonna have? What revenue are we really gonna have? And then we work from there. Because we don't wanna go down 4 weeks down the road and all of a sudden somebody comes back and says, you're not getting this money now. Then, yes, you'll pass it on next year, but then the year after, you're gonna pass it on even more. You're not gonna be able to do anything that you wanna do in the next 4 years. I think we ought to table this for the next meeting and have a serious discussion of, are we gonna get some money or are we not gonna get some money?
Right, so that's why we pulled the kindergarten aid out for 2021 and have not included anything extra in the 21-22 budget other than what's been sent down from Department of Ed's adequacy amount today and other numbers that we would be using. School building aid is always stable based on what you have out for bonds. And, the other change that I could see, special education aid always fluctuates. And if we open the schools back up next year for rentals, it's the only other source of income that we have. Medicaid, we're only at 50,000, and whether we get that next year or not, I'm hoping I at least get that. Again, we used to get 500,000 a year for that. So we're trying to be realistic in our projections. And so right now, the revenue source that we have in there, I think, are good projections. The only thing that will be different is what we have unspent at the end of June 30th that would offset the tax rate here. But again, I don't know what that's going to be.
I think just to support what Neil said about legislative fixes, we just showed a budget that was down over 1% expenditures, but also down over 4% revenue. So, we're cutting a lot, and we're hoping that the end point isn't that it affects the education, but we're not getting a lot of help from the state. So we just got, a bunch of incumbents. We also got a bunch of freshman legislators in our state. So we all need to be working hard to get them to work for Derry. And I know Mr. Perkins, the chair of the joint legislative committee for the town, is putting together basically what would be the first meeting of that legislative session to explain to our Derry senator and representatives what our town needs. So I would hope that, that Derry delegation would show up at that meeting, either in person or Zoom, and pledge to support the town of Derry, and that includes the education side.
2, perhaps possibly 3, school funding initiatives going on session. If you read the superintendent's bulletin, I think you'll find out that, the land change, and, with all due respect to Neil, we've had the same conversation for ad nauseum, and we still don't seem to get any real movement there. So if you're going to talk about it and get your delegation to get something done, that's the only way this is going to happen. Talking about it on television with us, got it. It's going to make the difference.
And I know that Bill did do he had a meeting on Friday with our association and with New Hampshire Retirement, and they are willing to come down or do a Zoom and zoom in and talk about why New Hampshire Retirement has their increase. That obviously is a significant part of increase on our budget, but we have no control over their rates. But I know they are willing to, if they're available, they could do one of our budget meetings and explain why those costs have increased.
Jane, if I could throw out a suggestion on that, and I'm not going to speak for the whole town council, but I guess I kind of will. I think the town council would like a presentation on that too, because again, we're all in the same boat here. I mean, again, you guys are doing really well on the spending side of things, but you lose 4% of your revenue every year. You can cut your spending all you want. You're just digging yourself a hole. So yeah, I mean, if I could just suggest maybe trying to coordinate, talk to Dave Karen and maybe trying to coordinate something between the school and the town council, because the retirement issue is one that keeps affecting us both, and it just keeps getting worse and worse every year. And I have my own viewpoints on it, but I'd like to know what the current thinking of at the state level is.
Neil, I think that's a great idea. I would love to see a joint meeting with the town council and have some of those representatives from New Hampshire Retirement and maybe from other departments that could come and speak to us about funding and costs and stuff. That'd be great.
So we have the legislative meeting tentatively at this point is scheduled for December 9th. I don't know if trying to implement those speakers or departments into that would be appropriate or not, but then you'd have to have the council involved in it, not just the council subcommittee, and same thing with the school board. So the board has also had a presentation from New Hampshire Retirement, was it 18 months ago or so? So I just throw that out. It's a lot to start inviting by December 9th, but I'm willing to try and do that if everybody's interested, but if it's too much too soon, I'm fine with not adding that, trying to add that to the agenda. So the intention is to get our newly elected or even our incumbents in, as Derek's already captioned, and try and explain all the difficulties that we're having trying to run a budget. So anyway, just threw that out. Anybody can chime in or not at this point. Thank you.
I'll just chime in with my 2 cents worth, Lynn. That's probably a big group to try and, between the legislators and, coordinating with the state and the entire town council and entire school board. And obviously members of the Fiscal Advisory Committee that might want to be involved. That's probably going to be a tall notion by December 9th. But again, whether we can get something with just the school board and town council, if that simplifies things, and then maybe follow up with at a future legislative delegation meeting. I mean, I honestly don't know what the state's position is. I just know we keep taking it in the shorts year after year.
So Neil, I'll, when Bill was just over here, he has the contact information of the person at New Hampshire Retirement that was willing to do it. So we'll reach out to them and find out what their availability is, and I'll work with Derek and the town and see what we can put together, because it does make more sense to just have the presentation once between both groups. And I'm sure it will be beneficial.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. So that concludes the PowerPoint portion of the presentation. Again, everything in your handout sort of all ties together. If anything's in yellow, that means something affected that area from the last budget meeting. So it's easy for you to draw your attention to where the changes have been made, and then they match up the function code to the summary page, to the function code of all of the changes on the back, and also the default. So all of those have been updated. And again, if you were to put the if you were to use all that 1.2 million in revenue, that would be the $1.31. If you were to take that 1.2 million back out, it would be $1.65. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew it wasn't $3. It's that 1775 was referring to the line previous. So I know that Derek has asked me to put together a couple of more charts for the next budget meeting, and Bill's already started on that. I think actually that could be sent out this week. So the question and answers that people had sent in or emailed to us, I believe that Tracy resent the link to everybody, because you may have questions that are already in that document. It is an active document, so anytime there's a new question, Patty just adds it to that document at the bottom, and whichever administrator it applies to, we fill in the answers for that. So if you are able to go on to that Google Doc, there's a lot of good information that's more than what we could put into a budget presentation. So a lot of things could be in there that might answer some of your questions, but of course, if you have more questions, certainly feel free to email us, and then check that Google Doc, because we're really pretty quick on getting the answers in there as quickly as we can. So I guess I'll hand it over to Derek to see if anybody has any further questions.
So there's some links in the Google document that if you click on, you have to then request permission. Is there a way to avoid that and just give everybody permission without having to request it?
We will figure that out,
Thanks.
but yes.
It would help if, we could put everything in the same folder so that and then give everybody permission to that folder, and then the links will all work.
Well, I know, I think Chris had a couple of links in there, and I clicked on them, and it said, you have to ask for permission. Right, but I'm wondering if there's a way to shortcut that. Yep.
Yep, we'll figure that out so that you can do that. I didn't realize that it was all locked, so I apologize for that.
And if I could just chime in with something, and I think I had mentioned this after the last round of questions. I would rather see an earlier cutoff time on the questions. It would be great if we could get these questions back on Friday, because the last two meetings, we've gotten them, pretty much Monday afternoon, which, for those of us that have jobs, we don't really have time to look at them and evaluate them and have follow-up questions and bring an intelligent conversation to the next meeting. So again, I'd rather see the questions get cut off on, say the Tuesday or the Wednesday, so that they can be prepared and get out to folks on Friday, so people can take the weekend and look them over and see if they've got any follow-up.
But those questions are updated real time, Neil. You don't need to put a timeline on it. You submit a question no matter when, they usually answer it within a day or two. And
Oh, okay, so that's good learning for me. I thought it was, I've been getting the emails on the Monday, but they're actually updated in the interim?
yeah, they're updated real time, yep.
Okay.
Yep, we wanted to send out a reminder so that people knew that they could go to that Google link. So you can go onto that Google link as often as you want, and.
Oh, okay, great,
Yep.
great, thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
Going through those questions, some really, really great questions. So I appreciate all the input and questions from the fiscal advisor and the school board members. Some things I never had thought of, and they were really amazing questions. So thank you very much for that. It's a great document to go through. You learn a lot, not only about our budgeting process, but about our district. So that's pretty amazing. Does anyone who submitted questions have further need further follow-up on those questions that you'd like to ask tonight, or if you just want to send them back through that document, you can do either way, but I want to give some time now. If there's any questions on any previous material, and then I'll ask in a minute what we want to see for next time.
If I understand correctly, the next meeting, or between now and the next meeting, the costs associated with the collective bargaining agreements will be reflected pretty much what we're actually talking about in terms of numbers?
Yes, we'll have the CBA numbers for both of the collective bargaining agreements. I will assume we'll have Pinkerton, but there's never any assumption to that. We should have an answer for the stabilization grant if it is correct what the state is giving you, or if they missed the 4% drop this year. And then we'll also just have an update on maintenance if there's any further maintenance necessary.
But the collective bargaining agreements are separate from this budget. They're a separate warrant article?
Both of them are, but I mean, most people are going to look at those and then add them into the tax rate. And
Yep. So the only thing that directly impacts this budget is Pinkerton.
yes. Oh, and potentially the stabilization grant if
Right.
they say, oops, we goofed. So but yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, just with regards to the stabilization grant money, you know, and we learned this a long time ago on the town side. Don't take a verbal from the state. Make sure you get it in writing, because we've just had it happen to us on the town side numerous times where they say, oh yeah, no, this is fine, this is how it's gonna be. And then it's like, oh no, really, that's not how it's gonna be.
Well, I can tell you this, Neil, that as a couple of changes happened since last Thursday, your comments at the last meeting about your caution in this regard rang in my ears several times, so for what it's worth, thank you.
So I'm reading the email from Caitlin, Department of Ed, that she sent out. She actually sent it out yesterday afternoon. And it states that the fiscal year 2022 adequacy grant distributions will include funding stabilization grants at 100% of the original grant in fiscal year 2016, and full adequacy funding for kindergartners that attended full-day kindergarten programs in fiscal year 21. I can forward this email with all the information to the committee and the board so that you can read all the information that she's provided.
Thank you very much. Is there any other information folks would like to see at the next meeting? We may potentially be at a point by then with all the data we need to get between now and then to start to make decisions and look for agreements. So what else would people like to get to that point next time?
Just in follow-up to what Jane just said, so she said, I believe it was 100% of what it was in 2016. So can we just verify what that number is? So again, we're all talking about the same number and we're not, thinking we're missing something somewhere?
Yes, and I just sent Patty an email, so she'll send all of this out to you tomorrow, and I'll talk to Caitlin to get a further explanation of what the 100% of fiscal year 2016 would have been.
Great, thank you, Jane.
One thing I haven't heard us talk about yet, but it's a question I've had, in most years in the budget, we include usually one floater position just in case numbers fluctuate, and I don't know how tight our classrooms are right now, but I was just curious I didn't see any floater positions in this budget, but I know that we can sometimes find ourselves in hot water if classes start to go up really high in the summer and we don't have a position to make up for that. So that's just something we've historically done that I'm curious about where we're at with that philosophically and practically.
We can address that next time, Erica. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Jane? Jane,
Hi, Gus. Yep.
I have a quick question for you. At
Yes.
the school board meeting last Tuesday, we're talking about the Chromebooks coming in, which we already budgeted for. And was that true that the Commons may have to pay a little more now to get them in earlier? did we budget for that, or is it just something we have to do for an emergency?
Wednesday, is that the target date?
Wednesday is the target date, and I believe they're a different model that we're able to get in sooner. I know that Cliff is,
So it did cost us more though, correct, than what we originally budgeted for?
correct. And we'll be applying through a grant for those Chromebooks.
Yeah, I thought the number was something like 61,000, we had to pay more, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, so we'll be able to get some of that money back, hopefully, correct?
right. The district is actually, I believe that the additional 200 per student from the state hit our accounts today. And there also is the additional funding that's available. I believe it's a $10 million amount that school districts are able to apply for. Caitlin sent out the instructions today for us to be able to move forward and do that. So every expenditure that's related to anything related to remote learning, COVID, cleaning, PPE, you name it, if it had anything to do with since March 13th in relation to COVID, we are applying for reimbursement for.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? All right, well, once again, thanks everyone for attending. The great questions, keep them coming, and we'll have hopefully at least the last bit of information we need to move forward. And just again, appreciate your time. Take a motion for adjournment. All right.
Second.
We will see everyone on the 30th, 6:30, same location.